Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I'm going to voice over the video because of the air conditioner running constantly due to all the heat we've been having here in the Midwest. So in this video I am finishing up the last row of the sew by row quilt along by Fat Quarter Shop. The quilt was designed by Lori Holt, and the last set of blocks are stacks of fabric. So there are a lot of little rectangular pieces and a lot of little corners to sew on to those little pieces to make it look like stacks of fabric. Now the original pattern was colored differently with different fabrics, and this is kind of an upgraded or refreshed color palette. This is using the fabrics, I think it's from Prim, the Prim line of hers, and so they're different, and the quilt is still cute, so I was real happy with the way these blocks turned out. What I find with block of the month projects is I have trouble keeping up with them, and basically because I have my own projects going, and I always put those as a priority over a block of the month project. So this this line or this project actually started last year sometime. I can't remember if it was late spring, I think maybe, or early summer. I don't remember exactly, but it was stalled due to shipping issues that are happening all around the world. You know, anything you order to be shipped in, it's going to take a while. So that's happening everywhere, not just things that you order off of Amazon or from a store. The Fat Quarter Shop has been having trouble getting materials in on a timely manner just because of shipping issues. So if you've been watching the news the last 2 years, you're familiar with that. So that has been a problem. I mean, it actually kind of helped me because I kind of got behind. But the quilt, this is the last row of the quilt, and then it'll be ready to put together. In this area here, I've sewn some squares on the sides of these little rectangles. This makes it look like folded fabric, and I did one block first before I did the others, just to kind of try it out and see how it's going to work. And you see I have my little pressing station set up right next to the sewing machine. Now it's not ideal because I'm right-handed, so it would be easier for me if it was on my right, but the way I have everything set up, it's on my left right there, so I just have to scoot my chair over to use it, or stand up, which is what I normally do. But lately I haven't been feeling like standing up for long periods of time. It's just too many back problems happening right now, so I just have to adjust. So these little squares are only 1 inch square, so they're little pieces to deal with, and I'm not much for sewing tiny pieces together. So this whole project actually was kind of a challenge just because of that. It's not like it's any harder than anything else as far as sewing. It's just handling the smaller pieces that seems to be a little bit more difficult for me. And but I sew it the same way with anything else. I'm still using a lightweight thread. It's a 50 weight, and got my stitch length on 2.0, so I don't have to worry about stitches coming loose. When you're doing these teeny tiny seams that are only 1 inch or a little bit shorter or longer, you don't want your stitches to pull out on the edges, so it helps if you just use a shorter stitch length. So now I'm sewing the rectangles together. So first I sewed on all the little squares, and now I'm sewing the rectangles together in rows, so they're kind of in in stacks of rows. So there'll be 2 separate rows to each block, and then they get sewn together with another strip of fabric between them that creates the ribbon that goes on those bundles. So it's a really simple block. It's not difficult. Just a lot of pieces to it. That's all there is. All there is to it. So it was one of the easier blocks, I think, in the project. Not that any of them were really difficult, but even though these had the 1-inch pieces, it didn't have the teeny tiny pieces like in the the tomato pincushions. Those had those little leaves that turned out to be 1/2-inch squares. So 1/2-inch, half-square triangles. So that was a bit of a challenge for me, but I was able to get those done. And I could see my thread holder on the left side of the screen. It's black. I've got my spool of thread in there, and I think I'm using a signature thread on there. I think I ran out of my 50 weight thread, so I switched over to a signature 40 weight thread. And the spool holder with the extension on it started giving me trouble later on. Every once in a while you can see where it pulls, like right there. And I don't know what's causing that. I never did figure it out. But that is an old spool holder. It actually belonged to a lady at my church, and I got it in a bundle of her items that the executors of her estate gave to me after she passed away. So I have no idea how old it is, but it's made out of plastic, so it's bent. You can see there it's kind of leaning over. So I'm going to need to replace that pretty soon. And then right here I am sewing in that middle strip that separates the 2 stacks of fabric, and I think that was a 1-inch strip. So once the other side is sewn on, it's just a little narrow piece. Now the instructions said to press all of your seams open, and I'm not much of one to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. So I'm pressing majority of these seams to the side here. So it all went together really well, so I didn't really have any trouble with that. And now I'm going to line up those 2 pieces. This first block here went together really well, and I didn't have any trouble with getting the pieces from one side of the center strip lined up with the other side. The second block I did have a little bit more trouble with that. I had to take it apart once and line everything up. So you want those seam lines from one side of the stack to line up with the same seams on the other stack. So it looks like a stack of fabric. You want those straight across. You don't want them looking like they're one side is higher than the other. But it all turned out okay. I just had to take a little bit more time with that one block. So that's what it looks like. I put the extra fabric on the bottom. Now one thing that I like about the Fat Quarter Shop's fabric, when they put together these kits, they give you a little extra fabric in case you mess up and miscut, which I did on this row of blocks. So that brown strip that goes through the center, I cut them all the same length, and I cut them for the length of the shortest stack of fabric. So I had to go back and recut all of them except for 2. So all of them were miscut except for 2 of those pieces. So there was enough fabric to do that. Luckily, I didn't do anything else wrong, or I'd have been out of fabric. I just have a few little tiny scraps left over of that fabric. But there is the completed block, and I'm just going to repress a little bit to get the seams laying the way I want them to. and then trim off that bottom piece just using a pair of scissors. So that block will be ready to go. And here I've done some of the other blocks already, and I trimmed the bottom of those off, and now I need to sew them all together. So they each have a sashing in between of the background fabric. So on this block I am sewing the outer sashing, which will make this row of blocks the same width as all the other rows. So it's quite a bit wider than the others. I think it's probably twice as wide. And so I'm just doing these all kind of one at a time and then sewing them together. So instead of sewing a sashing onto each block and then sewing all the blocks together, I'm sewing the sashing onto the block and then sewing that to the next block and doing it one at a time. So lots of different ways that you can do this. This is just the way that I am doing it. And I don't know that the instructions, as I remember them, they didn't specify which way would be better. So now I am re-threading my machines. I'm rewinding the bobbin. So here you will notice I have to grab hold of that thing because it keeps bending over. And I think what happens, there's a spot on that stand that's a little bit rough, and I think maybe the thread was catching on that. I'm not certain, but either way, I think it needs to be replaced. So I'll be searching for one of those. So I'll have to make a stop at the local fabric store and see if I can get a new one. So now I'm back to sewing the blocks together. So here's blocks 1 and 2 and sewing them together. And then I'll just continue until the entire row is done. So once that row is done, then I've got the finishing kit with the instructions for that. So I'll be cutting that fabric, and that covers the sashing between the rows and the borders. So, and I also have the backing kit, but I'm not ready for that just yet. Then the backing kit is just the backing fabric, and I think it's a wide fabric. I don't think I have to sew that together. One thing I wanted to mention is labels. I was going through a bunch of quilts the other day and writing down all the quilts that I needed to make labels for, because I've been negligent on making a label as soon as I get my quilts done lately. And so all of last year and most of the year before, all those quilts I made don't have labels on them, so I've got to get that done. So just a reminder that it is important to put labels on your quilts in case they are lost. You can put them on the front of your quilt and on the back of your quilt. You can put them on before it's quilted or after. I normally put them on after because most of the time I quilt fairly densely and it distorts the label. It's hard to read the label, so I usually put those on afterwards. Now, if somebody ever stole my quilt, it would be real easy for them to take that label off. So you can also fuse it on, just sew it on by machine or by hand. A lot of people will sew it into the backing at like an extra block in the backing, and they will sew that on or into their backing fabric and then quilt the quilt that way. And I saw one lady who started putting her labels on the front of her quilt. She'd use a smaller label, but she would put them in as a piece in one of her blocks. Like if she had a square in the middle of her block, she'd use that square for her label somewhere, which I think is a neat idea. That way it's right on the front and gets quilted over, and there's no reason to hide that information. So I think that's a neat idea too. And you can also write information in the binding area of your quilt. I know one quilter who does that. She, I don't remember if she puts labels on, but I do remember her telling me that she always wrote her name and the date that she made that quilt in a pigment pen, with a pigment pen in the seam of the binding. So the binding covers it. But if anybody steals her quilt and they're like, well, it's not yours, there's no label on it, she can say, yeah, there is, and pull back, loosen the binding and fold it over, and there it is. So, and it's in permanent ink, so it can't be removed without cutting the quilt. I have been lucky enough that I haven't had any quilts stolen or anything, so that's really not a problem. But if you are concerned about that, those are a couple of things you can do to label your quilts, and document them somehow in a spreadsheet or a Word document or a notebook. Take photos of your quilt and put all that information together in a book somehow. If you have time, I have photographs of all my quilts, but they're all either on my phone or on my computer. And I haven't made a journal or a notebook or anything like that of all my quilts, but that is something that I should probably consider. Okay, so I am about done with the row. I think I've got maybe 1 or 2 more blocks to go. I can't tell if that's my last. Yeah, that is the end of the row there. I'm putting on the last sashing piece. So I'll be showing you the entire row here in a minute. Now, one thing you can do on this block is to rearrange your fabrics any way you want. Now, the book that has the pattern in it, like I said, is using different fabrics, so they look a little bit different. And I did, I kind of followed the color layouts the way that book is. I mean, the prints are different, but the colors are similar. Not exact, but they're a little bit similar. But the first 2 blocks in this row, I kind of just did my own thing and rearranged them a little bit different. There were a lot of pinks and a lot of greens, and I think there were supposed to be 1 stack with all pinks and 1 with all greens, but the greens were so similar in shade that I didn't think it looked good. It just looked like a stack of the same fabric. So I mixed those 2 up, and so those will be on the left when I hold that up. It'll be on the left of the screen, and you can see there's reds and pinks right there. The reds and the greens and the pinks are all mixed together, instead of having 1 row of greens and 1 row of reds. So remember that whenever you are making a quilt, you can always do things differently. Make it your own, change things around. You don't have to follow the pattern exactly, and mix up the colors however you want, and mix up the blocks however you want. So you don't have to follow the pattern to the letter, and just have fun with it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you are all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.